Yeah, so we are a volunteer-driven committee of 6,000 professionals who build and manage products. Our members belong to a diverse set of roles: product managers, founders, CXOs, designers, consultants, all sorts of aspiring creators, and they all come from different domains. We are an active, thriving community on Slack, so please join us if you aren't already there. I'll start by quickly introducing myself. I am Kaushik Bhatt. I'm currently an engineering manager at Razorpay Capital, the lending arm of Razorpay. I've been part of various fintech companies in the past, leading product and engineering teams for the past 10 years. Yeah, having said that, please welcome our expert for today, Gaurav Sharma. Gaurav, thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to us on the Saturday evening. A quick introduction about Gaurav. Gaurav is the founder and CEO of Atlantis. Here, if you're on Twitter, you would have seen his tweets. A lot of good, amazing tweets on fintech. He's a serial entrepreneur with 18 years in fintech, consumer tech, consumer banking. He's a 3x founder with 2 successful exits. He's been part of seven ventures from big banks to early stage tech companies and has built businesses in 4 countries. So I think he's seen it all in terms when we talk about fintech. So like really happy to have you here and guide us. He's a well-respected member of the global fintech community, and yeah, we will hear more from him about like all the areas that he has worked on. Gaurav, welcome. Thank you again, once again. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit more about yourself, Atlantis, and your journey?
Great. Thanks, Kaushik. It's great to be on the show. Before I get started, why don't we just take a few seconds and acknowledge, and celebrate the wonderful success stories which are coming out of India. Zomato IPO, super successful, right? Impending Paytm IPO, and several more which are following suit. It requires, considerable amount of grit, dedication, courage, commitment on part of, hundreds, if not thousands of people to make something work like that, right? So cheers to the Indian success story, first of all there, right? So world-class companies, I think this is the Indian moment which is happening. There are a lot of other good, wonderful, global companies which are getting created. To name the few, I might miss few. Razorpay, right? You work with them, Shashank and Marshall, world-class company. Pine Labs, great, solid leadership now there. Zoho, Freshdesk, right? These are world-class, outstanding companies. CleverTap, Cred. I know it's slightly polarized, but I love the founder. I love the company there, right? So great global success stories. This is, I think, the golden period for the Indian tech and startup ecosystem. Never before in the entrepreneurial history of Indian ecosystem has things been this good. The trifactor of capital, talent, and market. This is so good, right? So next 10 years are going to be super, super exciting, right? If this is good, the next 10 years is going to be like 100x, 1000x good. So that's, I just wanted to park it at the start of our discussion, right? Now, so that we get back to the, matters of the day. Good evening, everyone. For those of you who are spending some time with us on a Saturday evening, right? Thank you for being here. My name is Gaurav Sharma, as Kaushik. Sorry, I have a bad throat, so pardon me for that. My name is Gaurav Sharma, and I'm founder and CEO of Atlantis. We are an early stage fintech company, a sort of startup of our own. We are focused on India and Southeast Asia market. And we have 2 products in the markets as of now. Our first product is called Yoda, which is a teen banking proposition. Our mission there is to build a community of financially aware teenagers for the next decade. If you have teenagers in your family, go give it a spin, send us your feedback. Our second product is focused around SMBs in Southeast Asia, a combination of credit, SaaS, and corporate card. It's still in closed beta, very early days. And we have something marinating for millennials in India. We'll talk about that later on. A little bit in terms of my background, I think Kaushik requested me to slightly give a detailed, background. In addition to what he outlined and also highlighted. I've been in banking and fintech for some time now, been part of several ventures from early stage to maturity and concept stage. Worked with large banks, early stage tech companies, built businesses in 4 different countries, started 3 companies, 2 successful exits. Uh, Also started a Bitcoin micro remittance company in 2014 in Singapore. Uh, Started my first entrepreneurial project when I was 12 or 13 year olds, if that counts, right? So it's been good fun journey so far. Operated on balance sheets as big as 10 billion US dollars, uh, and as size from a size standpoint, 10 to 15 million customers. The common thread across all this has been consumer credit, retail banking, mobile payments, AI, and fintech. So excited to be here, spending some time on a Saturday evening with you guys.
Sure. Thank you, Gaurav. Thank you for the detailed introduction. Yeah, so before we start, some house rules. Please be yourself on mute. Uh, and we will cover like the main topics for the first 40-45 minutes. And towards the end of the call, we will take questions. Keep asking your questions on chat, and we will get some of you to like come on the call and ask those questions. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining in once again. Gaurav, let's get started. This is very exciting. Yeah, so the first question that I wanted to touch upon is like fintech has been the hottest industry for the last 10 years, right? Like it has been uh, growing, thriving. So how would you say that fintech has evolved and have we lived up to the promise?
Okay, so that's a very interesting question, right? I think fintech has evolved in a very meaningful way, right? We have come a long way from the time when people would usually say, "What's fintech?" to a time which is now in terms of wow fintech, right? So that's one big journey, how this has panned out, right? The past 10 years have been super exciting. Fintech wave, if I could call fintech 1.0 as a wave, which literally started post Lehman crisis 2008 onwards and culminated, end of 2020, and then we are in the middle of fintech 2.0, which is the new wave for the next 10 years, right? The fintech wave one was unevenly distributed across geographies, customer segments, industry categories, right? Now we are witnessing the peak of that. So to answer that question of yours in terms of how things have evolved in the past 10 years, let me kind of like give you a very high level. This is still 30,000 feet view in terms of what transpired over 10 years globally, right? There are several $100 billion plus outcomes in US and China. I'm sure all members in the audience are familiar with these outcomes. PayPal, Stripe, Square, and Financial, Tencent, right? These are global $100 billion plus outcomes. So fintech story in some form and fashion is clearly defined by how these companies shaped up, right? China is the real fintech story in wave one in past 10 years. From a category standpoint, Kaushik, if I look at it, the entire banking and fintech ecosystem can be broadly categorized across 6-7 themes, right? So let's spend few seconds in each of these themes so that we understand what happened. Number one was alternate lending, which essentially meant giving new loans, new credit, right? So a lot of action started happening in United States with the start of companies such as Prosper, Lending Club in those early days. But the action fast shifted to China, right? Thanks to the mobile penetration and the local market effects, so on and so forth. But if I want to put a size and shape to this entire alt lending construct, I think in wave one, close to 90 to $100 billion worth of new credit got created in the United States. The corresponding number for China would be close to 1.3 to $1.4 trillion. That's new credit through these new age fintech companies. That number sharply drops for Europe, maybe in the range of 10 to 12 billion dollars or 20 billion dollars, on a very optimistic broad estimate. And it goes further down for India, maybe just a $2 billion outlay through new age fintechs in terms of balance sheets, right? So that's very high level, broad alt lending story, right? Second was big category called payments, right? You belong to that industry now. This was the showstopper. This was a darling for last 10 years, right? Whether it is B2B payments or B2C payments. This also, the underlying theme also is digitization of everything, right? So we saw massive action in this space. We saw the likes of Adyen, we saw the likes of PayPal, Stripe in the Western Hemisphere. We saw Ant Financial, Alipay, WeChat Pay in the China ecosystem. We had a major success story in India, Paytm, right? UPI and all this thing is a manifestation in that direction. A lot of B2B payment companies found great success stories. So that's big place. So trillions of dollars worth of transactions started moving in a digital only or a digital first construct, right? The opportunity still remains very huge right now. So that's number two. Number three, insurance, which is protection, right? Globally, I think only recently some action has started happening in this category, primarily because huge capital is required to get started something in insurance space. I'm not talking of distribution here, right? So to build a full stack insurance company, you need to, have the ability to underwrite, provide for licensing, so on and so forth, right? And that too, the action was primarily limited to the non-life part of insurance industry. China saw some huge success story like Ping An, Zhong'an, and all that stuff, and that too because of conglomerate approach and construct, and also benign regulatory structures. So that's the insurance side of past 10 years, right? It's a high level. The fourth category, I think, is wealth tech, which essentially saw a very good experiments in the United States around companies such as Wealthfront, Betterment, and off recently Robinhood's, right? No one needs an introduction there. A lot of exciting stuff happening. They recently filed for their IPO as well. So that's one story, right? China saw some huge money market models coming out. Yubo was on big lead. That too because it came out of Alibaba ecosystem, right? Wherein micro investments and micro savings could be translated into overnight deposits, thereby generating superior yields, right? India saw its own success stories. Zerodha is an outcome of this great success story in the robo-advisors and wealth tech space, right? There are some interesting experiments in India. Very early days. You have Paytm Money, you have ET Money, you have IND Wealth, so on and so forth, right? So the movie continues, but yes, we saw some blockbusters, right, while it was happening. Then there is this another interesting category which emerged very fast, right? And people had huge, expectations, but it fizzled out in the recent times. This category is called peer-to-peer lending, right? We saw interesting operating models emerging in the West, which is companies like Lending Club, Prosper, out of UK, companies like Zopa, but immediately it gathered steam as far as China markets were concerned, right? There, the size, volume, and scale were completely out of this planet. From 2016 onwards, it started fizzling out when PBOC, which is the regulator in China, started, hammering down from a compliance, regulations, securitization, capital requirements, risk sharing, so on and so forth, right? So automatically, several thousands of companies were shut down during the period of 2017 and 2018, right? The action shifted to Indonesia. The hot monies immediately moved there. Now, OJK for past 12, 18 odd months, OJK is the RBI equivalent of Indonesia, is in the process of culling out, setting the house in order, cleaning up some of this P2P related, additional risks which have been built into the system. The Indian regulators are slightly prudent in terms of creating a new category called P2P NBFCs. Unfortunately, the volume and the scale is nothing to write, about. These are small companies, size and scale standpoint, right? One interesting dimension of that is most of the P2P companies was an illusion. The operating model was I2P, which is institution to peer. So there is a huge securitization construct which operates from a balance sheet standpoint. The Indian P2P sector more has a supply side problem, right? And we can talk about it slightly, in detail later on. This is top 5 categories. Then the number 6 category, is a very, very dear category of mine, which essentially is the decentralization paradigm, right? Which is a parallel story which is running out right from the Genesis block, Bitcoin, to Bitcoin white paper 2009 onwards. Fast forward to January 2021, $1 trillion worth of store of value getting created is mind-boggling. And another $1 trillion worth of DeFi, alternate crypto asset ecosystem is amazing success story, right? So these are 5-7 themes around which I would summarize the entire fintech, wave one of past 10 years or so, right? But mind you, while all this is happening, Kaushik, it's important to understand that this movie is playing out in the backdrop of several other thematic shifts which are happening globally, right? Now, what are these shifts? And it's important to understand that because they have a huge impact in terms of how things pan out over the next 10 years. Number one, the money printing experiment, right? Central bankers all over the world are just printing money from 2009, 2008 onwards, and it has not stopped. COVID itself has seen 6, 7, 10 trillion dollars of money getting printed, whether it's ECB, whether it is Japan, whether it is, Fed in US, right? And this ain't stopping. So this is one. Second is debt is an all-time high, global debt, right? Close to $150 trillion worth of global debt was created in past 15, 16 years alone. So the global debt right now, I think, is somewhere between 240 to 270 trillion dollars. I've stopped tracking it, right? So that's one big shift that's happening. A large part of it, which is 20, 23 trillion dollars, is running at zero yields or negative yields. So that's again very big shift, right? So one has to understand. And all this is happening while capital markets, S&Ps, your Dow Jones, your BSEs are going all-time high, right? So this is multiple stories which are happening while we are talking of the fintech stories, right? Bitcoin and crypto related, everyone knows Elon Musk, right, has kind of like brought it to the mainstream, right? So have a fun while you study all that thing. CBDC experiment, right? Again, it's a very, very interesting part of it, which essentially is central bankers all over the world now wanting to have a digital version of their own fiat currency, right? So this is one, again, big theme which is playing out. Besides that, the meta themes, that one can also talk about is things like we have the lowest mortality rate ever in the known history of mankind, right? The human lifespan has increased. That's again a big theme, right? Yeah. We are living in one of the most peaceful times in the human history. Earlier, there used to be wars every 10 years, every 4 years, right? We are living in the most peaceful times in the human history. There is abundance of wealth. Never before in the known history of mankind, so much of money and wealth has been created for so many people, right? But at the same time, income inequality is increasing, right? Yeah. So that's big themes. These are the things around which and the lens around which I look at, what happened and transpired in the evolution of fintech in wave one.
Yeah, that was like a really detailed explanation. Yeah, so before we like go into some of these specific areas, right? Can you talk about like what are the most exciting areas which are still at a very early stage and show a lot of promise? Basically, like if new founders, new creators are trying to get into fintech, what is something that is still to be explored and a lot of innovation is still pending?
Uh, so I have lots of answers around that, right? But might I suggest, something? Let's talk in terms of, how the things are going to pan out over next 10 years, because from that, the answer to your question will come in terms of what the opportunities are out there, right? Whether they are India specific opportunities, whether they are outside India opportunities, right? The way to understand this, Kaushik, is to just look at the time axis, from where we are standing, right? And kind of like have two time horizons. One is a near-term time horizon, and second is a slightly medium to long-term time horizon. I'm a slightly medium to long-term time horizon, right? Because automatically, as human beings, we have, cross-wired to grossly overestimate what happens in 1 year, but at the same time, grossly underestimate what happens in 10 years, right? So let's spend few minutes in terms of some of the near-term opportunities. Some of them could be geography specific from where you are and where the large chunk of audiences are. And then we talk about the big themes, the tectonic shifts that are happening, right? There's a large interplay in terms of how this thing pans out. The near terms, I'm going to just quickly skip through some of these points, right? Because the operators, the practitioners, the students of fintech, they understand these themes, right? But the summary is as follows. And this is across those 6 categories that I talked about, right? So you will see rebundling of product and services. That's very simple. It's already visible right now. We moved from an unbundling phase. We are now in a rebundling phase. That's one, right? A shift is from monoline to multi-line product proposition. That's very simple shift that's happening. Disappearing payments is a big shift, right? Payments are becoming frictionless and ambient and invisible. Invisible banking is another big shift that's happening, right? We are moving on a spectrum from e-commerce to social commerce, and thereby it has an impact whether on credit creation, community creation, or the transaction layer of the business. This is again very interesting part of it. The evolution of businesses on a payments plus construct is happening now, right? So transaction businesses are now combining themselves with various other opportunities, which are adjacent categories that are available. New companies, which are ecosystem plays, are getting created, right? So that's very interesting opportunities. Product alone cannot win the day, as you speak. Blockchain, smart contracts, AI are finding, some kind of spotlight, under the sun these days, right? Great success stories, Maker, Polychain, and all that stuff. API explosion, which is your entire embedded fintech play, is happening. We can happily talk about open banking. We can talk about API banking, neo banking, so on and so forth. That's one big theme, right? Banks are adjusting their operating models from a competition first construct to a collaboration first construct. So that's very good theme that is playing out, right? They realized in fintech wave one that, hey, access to talent is not possible. The capabilities to move at fast speed, which is needed for to build relevant solution. Collaboration first approach is critical, right? Consolidation in wallets, PFM, and all lending aggregators will continue to keep happening. That's another simple theme which is playing out. Increase in cybersecurity and data privacy, compliance stack, right? That's another near-term, themes which are playing out. Pronounced customer expectation. because now the reference points of customers are defined, right? As I rightly say, innovation doesn't happen because of technology. Innovation happens because of customers' expectation shift, right? That's market driven largely. So that's what is playing out right now. A lot of data partnerships are underway. Microcredit, micro investments, micro insurance are huge categories which are building up. And this is all near term I'm talking of. When my definition of near term here is less than 1,000 days, right? 3 years at max. Banks are facing a very serious shortage of digital and tech talent, right? And as a result, massive projects and transformation projects are underway. COVID was one example in terms of accelerating this entire transformation, right? This is a very near term, right? But I don't look at this and get excited, right? Yes, of course, you need to formulate a short-term strategy basis this. What I'm super excited about is what happens over the next 10 years, right? You know, as operators, as business builders, as founders, as people who are deciding and venturing on their career trajectories, it's very important to understand and build strategy, business around things that will not change over next 10 years or so, right? So my theme around this is that more innovation will happen in next 10 years than the previous 100 years that has happened. That's one simple theme, right? If I were to summarize in terms of what happens over next 10 years, whether it is Metcalfe's law, whether it is Moore's law, right? As they say, Moore's law eats innovation curve of Silicon Valley. That is playing, and this is the law of accelerating innovation. The compounding effect gets triggered. If wave one was the foundation part of laying the fundamental building blocks in terms of what happens in fintech, next 10 years are only going to benefit in an exponential manner, right? So what happens over the next 10 years, right? And then I'll come maybe to the market specific opportunities, right? Because by the time the smart guys in the audience would have figured out by the time I finish, talking about how next 10 years are going to pan out. Right? Okay. And stop me if I'm going too fast, right? I generally have a habit of, talking fast. So stop me if I'm doing that one. If certain points requires repetition.
Sure.
So the big themes, the meta plays here are, I think one or two big themes are the cloud nation and the sovereign individuals, right? Balaji talks about it really well. You can find he has written exceptional essays in that regard. I would strongly encourage each and every one of you who's listening in to go and read those stuff. That's one big theme going to play out, right? There would be a huge resistance along the way from centralized governments, but I'm super bullish on that theme, right? Number two, if past 10 years of fintech were constructed around mobile first paradigm, the next 10 years of fintech would be designed around AI first and crypto first paradigm. That's theme two, right? And we are just at the beginning of this. So that's very interesting, meta play that I'm looking at. We are at the same time on the verge of massive upheaval of the monetary system, that we live in from two opposing forces. One is the freely created cryptocurrencies that are happening on the world size, right? So that's one dimension. But on the other side is the digital currencies of central banks. So there's going to be huge collision, around these two experiments which are playing out, right? I'm super bullish on the freely created cryptocurrencies because digital CBDCs is nothing but a digital extension of the fiat construct, right? So that's one. What is also undergoing fundamental change, Kaushik, is the definition of bank will undergo a fundamental change, right? What is bank will change? People I'm sure have already started, connecting the dots forward, right? The bank of the future is not a bank. We all can, agree on it, right? But at the same time, that's a big category, right? So the lens that I look at this fintech next 10 years is very simple. as I speak, 50% of the world's population is still unbanked.
Yeah.
An additional 20% is underbanked.
Yeah.
And I have just outlined you all the wonderful things that have happened in the banking and the fintech world. So imagine the opportunity that sits there for next 10 years and 20 years, right? So that's one. So by over next 10 years, I think the largest banks in the world will be not a bank, right? Will be primarily a tech company in the financial services product play. Examples of some of the large companies which have shown a solid promise, like Stripes, Square, and Fin. Again, of course, they have come under the cloud of regulatory supervision, so on and so forth. Affirm, right? PayPal. But there are a lot of asset categories which are still unaddressed. So you're likely to see the companies which are $100 billion to $500 billion plus outcomes, the companies which are just getting started, right? So they're not on anyone's radar, right? That's the big opportunity, right? That plays out. Most of the large economies in the world would be low cash or no cash, because this digitization of everything, CBDC experiments would be already underway, right? So in any case, online propagation of online commerce, mobile payments, and all that stuff would have ensured that the large component of transactions in the local economy and the ecosystem is digital first, not transaction part of it. That's another big theme, right? I also see the liability side of a bank balance sheet becoming redundant now, because of the blurring of the lines between deposit and lending. The velocity of the money is increasing, right? Earlier, it used to take 10 days to move money from point A to point B, whether it is sending a physical check. Now the money moves seamlessly within seconds. UPI, mobile payments, P2P, Venmos of the world. Cross-border is still a challenge, but good experiments happening, Remitly, Wise, and all that stuff. But with the increased velocity of money and on-demand availability of money and cash flow as a solution, which is money is available at the tap of a button, whenever you are, whenever you want it. This will see a big blurring of the lines between deposit, lending, spending, so on and so forth, right? Personalization, contextual credit, automation, technology makes it possible. There's enough data around each one of us. The banking that you need is different from the banking I need, because both of us are individuals who are different. Our cash flow needs are different. Our demands are different. Our credit requirements are different. Our spending habits are different, right? So that's one big opportunity that's going to play out over the next 10 years in terms of building a personalized financial services proposition around each and every individual, right? So this is part of it. I also see, and I briefly touched about in my earlier part of this segment, banking becoming slightly invisible. Smart banks are quickly realizing, hey, they can either be on the infrastructure, which is the balance sheet part of it, behind the curtain, or they can be in the customer ownership. They cannot do both, right? So smarter ones are partnering with the fintechs and non-fintechs in terms of solving for the distribution and acquisition side of it. One big opportunity, and also something that we are working on, is a large play in terms of marketplace will emerge, which essentially is curated thousands of apps and APIs around the fintech ecosystem, right? Think of it like the Apple Store of financial services. Very early days, but this requires a collaborative first construct, because tens and hundreds of companies and APIs will have to come together to build. And to solve for this, what is critical is to put customer at the center of this rather than company at the center of this, right? It's very important and nuanced approach around this. So this is another big theme that I'm, super excited and in terms of playing out. Financial services, we talked about, this eternal cycle of bundling and rebundling and unbundling continues. So fragmentation will start happening, right? So that will continue. What is bank? What is fintech? What is non-fintech? Those demarcations will go away, right? I think Anderson Horowitz has a very interesting article in terms of every company is a fintech company. I would strongly urge all of you to go study that. That will show some interesting arrows in terms of how this is panning out. Another big category I've written extensively about this also is autonomous finance, in terms of how the cognitive load of money management moves out, right? Currently, we have to keep track of how the investments have to be made. How much money do I need at the beginning of the month, end of the month, cash flows and all. Imagine there was a machine and an operating system which does that for you. Your personal Alfred, your personal, your Jeeves, so on and so forth, right? The machines are capable of, once we understand and we solve for the privacy, the data, and open banking construct. That is something which will play out. I think that is step 2 of this embedded fintech journey after the contextualization and wiring has been done. So that's very, very important, right? Regulatory themes are also playing out. So regulations will also undergo evolutions. Forward-thinking central bankers world over are wanting to encourage ecosystem innovation, right? So, and India is a very, solid example of that in terms of how central bankers have gone about in terms of enabling, a safe innovation construct, right, in a controlled manner. So I also talked briefly about in terms of money operating systems, right? We talk about data operating systems, we talk about payment operating systems, but no one talks about personalized money operating systems. While all this unbundling is happening, chances are you as an individual have 10 different fintech apps on your phone or on your, or that you subscribe to. I foresee in next 5 to 10 years, we would want all this to converge into one single money button on our phone, which understands us really, really well. Now, how that is orchestrated is someone else's problem, but as a user, as a customer, right, I would want to see that happening. So that keeps us, slightly excited in terms of, how the conversion happens. Have you seen that movie, Her? Joaquin Phoenix. So there is this character which has this ear thing, Samantha operating system in the right ear, right? So think of it like that, right? And this is underlying themes such as voice first construct, all playing out, right? Wherein this device that we are holding right now is already in a peak mobile phase, right? 70% of the mankind, whether they have a job or not, whether they have a bank or not, they have a mobile phone, correct? So what is happening is, while we are in the peak mobile phase, we are in the gestation phase of the next stage platform. So solutions and all will have to be built around what comes after a mobile platform, right? Whether it is a voice first construct, whether it is the augmented reality, or a mixed reality paradigm. And to the other extreme, I think it's the complete metaverse, right? So it's completely very, very exciting space, right? In medium term, I think the dominance of large big banks, will slightly start eroding. I know the balance sheets and scale and size of most of these banks have gone up. That's because of very simple reasons. There's too much of money getting printed, and the savings rates have completely, spiked during the COVID period. So people are not spending that much. So that's playing out, right? Then there are, I'm going to talk about 2 more things, and then I'm going to take a pause because I don't want to overwhelm, your listeners and audience in terms of what all possibilities are. And mind you, all these are multiple realities. It's not a binary 0-1, either or. All these things will play out at the same time in parallel at different stages of evolution, right? Another big theme is this entire AI plus blockchain, right? On AI, which is slightly a centralized thing, and a blockchain, which is a slightly decentralized paradigm. I think that's an ultimate combination, resulting into very interesting plays such as AI marketplaces, crowdsourced predictive models, hedge funds, some kind of interesting investment products and all, right? That's the evolution. We will also see very interesting plays in infrastructure as a service. So far, the way the AWS construct has panned out, and we all belonging to the startup ecosystem world understand that if you take AWS out, there is no startup success story in the world, right? As simple as that. Maybe I'm oversimplifying it.
Yeah.
Now imagine if there was an AWS cloud equivalent for the fintech specific solution set, right? Whether it is solving for your compliances, whether it is solving for your go to market, whether it is solving for all of the infrastructure requirements, right? Available on a pricing construct. That I think is a very big unattended opportunity, and that gets me super excited in terms of how things are going to pan out, right? So these are the themes which I think will play out. One big theme, and that is something which is already baked in, is we will see a shift in terms of the new monetary standard, right? The US dollar that you might have in your wallet, if you're still carrying it around, is just a 110, 120-year-old story. The euro is just 15, 20, 30 years old, 25-year-old story, maybe maximum, right? I think we are going to see a big shift, from the days where a new monetary system would emerge, right? And that would be a Bitcoin standard, a store of value. That looks like the most probable case right now in terms of how Bitcoin has been able to go through all trials and tribulations, for the need of a better word, right? And still kind of like has anti-fragility built into it. Yeah. So these are the big themes, Kaushik, which I'm looking at it, from the vantage point, and this is what gets us exciting, right? So many wonderful things to do.
Yeah.
I'm going to drink some water to that. Okay.
Yeah, no, this is really exciting. I can't wait for the future. Some of the
beauty of future is you have to create it. That's the exciting part.
Yeah, and I'm sure like everyone in this room is equally excited about working on these opportunities. Yeah, so having like seen a bit about the future, let's talk about like how things are faring in India and like Asia. So especially like in India, like there has been a lot of fintech players who are working on alternate data. Southeast Asian countries have like shown some success stories around that. In one of your tweets, you mentioned that credit bureaus will become redundant. So can you give an insight about how these companies have performed? Are we able to tap into like new to credit customers? Are we able to expand on our inclusion story?
Right. Good question. Right. So I'll expand on that question a bit, right? And then I'll immediately narrow down on the specifics of what you just said. So a lot of innovation is happening, but innovation so far is concentrated around the product innovation part of it, right? If you look at the innovation stack, it starts with product innovation and it keeps climbing up, right? So wave one, past 10 years, currently, a lot of product innovation is happening. Over next several years, you will see very interesting experiments in operating model innovation and distribution innovation. Remember, these are very critical building blocks of a value stack in terms of rendering useful, relevant, contextual services to the customer and thereby creating a valuable company over a long period of time. Right? You briefly talked a bit about credit lending, right? I have this saying, right? Credit is older than money and fintech. Right?
Yeah.
It's a thousands of years old story. Right? The history of mankind is nothing but the history of debtors and creditors, right? Whether it is the wars, whether it is the central bankers, whether it is creation of new nations.
Yeah.
That's the simple story. So fundamentally, credit as a business model has not undergone a change. Right? We still oversimplify it and look at it from a principal and interest and a repayment construct standpoint. We are seeing some interesting experiments worldwide now. Some of them are also happening in the local ecosystem in India and Asia. Whether it is, and these are experiments which have interesting names as well, right? I'm sure most of the audience can relate with the labels such as BNPL,
yeah,
buy now, pay later. It existed in smaller villages in form of local personal khata books, right? A khata book is a company in India as well, right? Wonderful company, right? But essential is about creating consumption credit, right? Especially in ecosystems wherein you don't have a digital credit or a plastic available for consuming credit. So you provide customers who are thin file. That means they don't have a credit track record with a new interesting opportunity to buy a particular good of their liking and repay it over a period of time. There's also experiments around flow-based lending, right, which is primarily concentrated right now around the enterprise and the business side of it, which is B2B. Very soon you'll see them moving into the consumer side of it, right? Because end of the day, it's money, right?
Yeah.
So to answer your question, I think the way I'm looking at this is there are a bunch of experiments which are underway and a bunch of things which is specific to India where we are seeing sizable value getting created, right? And this is value from a customer standpoint, right? And also from companies which are getting created. This entire cash flow first paradigm, which essentially means you get money when you need it, wherever you need it, is such a important thing to happen in a country like India, wherein large chunk of population essentially still is underbanked or unbanked and does not have access to mainstream credit. Right? I remember in our growing up years, getting a personal loan used to be a nightmare. Right? You literally had to put a file together, pull out all kind of reports, banking statements, verify your credentials, and then hope and pray that the person who's going to interview on the other side of the loan desk is going to like you. And the loan amounts are also subjective in nature, right? Depending on the average balances that you've been able to maintain. The pricing was also a function of the subjective risk assessment that happens in the mind of the credit officer. Right? Now we have come a long way from that construct. So there is a lot of innovation that's beginning to happen in the neo-banking space, API banking, open banking, right? So on and so forth. But fundamentally, Kaushik, concept of lending has not changed, and that has to change. So one interesting problem that I'm throwing at the audience, right? And if there is someone who is a founder in the audience who's listening and wants to collaborate, right, and do something meaningful, is concept of lending has to change. Interest rate is thousands of year old concept, right? Since the days of Hammurabi and all. The new protocols, the new operating model will emerge where the cost of capital is zero or negative. How do you create a credit proposition in that kind of paradigm, right? We are entering that zone, the black hole now, right? Where everything in terms of asset pricing, everything is thrown out of the equation because now the cost of capital is zero and the yields are negative. How do you define for that? Right? That's very interesting problem to solve in my mind. Second, there are a lot of interesting experiments which are beginning to happen within the credit card industry, right? Credit card as a form factor has not changed in past 5 decades, right? If you look at a credit card of someone's pocket 1960s, 1970s, it's still the same that you and I carry around.
Yeah.
Right? Nothing much has changed. Yeah, the offers might have changed, but half of them are still irrelevant for us, right? So I think there's an opportunity to kind of like refragment and build something which is relevant for the new world. BNPL is one extension of that thread, right? Which is okay, people who don't have a digital credit card. So that's something. There is a lot of good, interesting opportunities, the SMB space that I'm seeing, which is an integration of payments, credit, transaction, banking, loyalty, and all coming together. We're also working on something similar in Southeast Asia on that one. I think Razorpay also is doing, something in that space. Contextual credit, insurance, investments, right? All these are nice, interesting, experiments which are playing out. Distribution as a service is a very interesting category. I think credit is by and large, Kunal is doing a marvelous job in that direction, right? Very few people understand. A lot of people have opinions on the company, but I think that's a masterstroke in terms of, how he's panning out the entire commerce, the D2C part of it, right? A lot of challenges to be solved for, but it's an interesting problem to solve, right? I've seen that happening in China in size and scale, so I know which way the tide will turn, and how the twains will meet. That's the way. There is massive opportunity in bottom of pyramid banking, right? Microfinance as a sector will have to go through a digital curve of its own. Some of the big microfinance sectors in India specific have moved up the stream in terms of getting small bank licenses. The regulators have opened the tap in terms of mobilizing and bringing down the cost of deposits. Of course, the NIM related constraint still remains. There is opportunity in terms of debt resolution, right? When you create new credit, chances are the resolution of debt remains a humongous, which is other side of the problem statement. Credit building, where you have millions and millions of people who are thin files, that they have no credit track records. How do you create manufactured products which essentially are able to bring them into the mainstream fold of credit? That itself is such a marvelous opportunity. Financial education, again, a personal favorite of mine, and this is one of the big missions that we have set ourselves on in terms of ensuring that we not only provide relevant contextual financial products, but also ensure that our communities are educated in terms of what is the right product for them, what are the right decisions around financial education. As unfortunately, money and wealth is a taboo subject in Indian household, right? We don't discuss all those things, right? But neither do our schools teach us all those things. There's massive opportunity. So what happens, right? You have a bunch of, if those things don't happen, what happens? You have a bunch of, 30-year-olds walking around taking decisions, around hundreds of thousands of dollars about their companies and salaries, but they don't, understand how to create wealth for themselves, right? That I think is to be solved for. And the biggest travesty of that is the millennial class in this. That's a generation, I belong to that generation, which is, I think, worse affected in terms of two large economic recessions during the most productive decades of their life, right? Whether it is 2008, whether it is Euro crisis, and this now current slowdown, so on and so forth. DeFi and crypto remains very relevant. So all these things are interconnected in terms of how this is playing out. There are a lot of good experiments that I'm seeing, right from, custodian wallets to right from identity part of it that needs to be solved for. The good part, and I'm now narrowing down in India specific part of it, Kaushik. The good part is, and we have to thank a lot of companies, whether it is the communities that kind of like in wave one laid the foundation and building blocks of how fintech pans out. So UPI, credit bureaus, identity, which is Aadhaar, right? Then your clearance houses, your regulations, right? All these are foundational building blocks. Online commerce, you have to give full marks to, full credit to Paytm for bringing digital payments in the mainstream. Before Paytm, hardly anyone understood the concept of digital payments. But now there is hardly anyone who does not understand what a mobile payment means in this country, right? So that's a very, very big advantage on which the new age fintechs are getting built around. This is the foundation, right? Wherein we don't have to go and explain and request someone, hey, put your card in an online. I belong to a generation wherein literally people used to be averse of sharing their credit card details on an online site. Now we have reached a generation which does not care and says, okay, things are in place, right? So that's the exciting part of it, right? There are a lot of good experiments running in parallel, but nothing much has happened from a size and scale standpoint. Fintech, in India and Southeast Asia, and this is my definition of India, Southeast Asia is new China, right? There are 2 billion people, hugely unbanked and underbanked. So a lot of companies are needed. So if someone tells me there are too many fintech companies, I tell them you need 10x more for the size and scale of problem that we are solving. And yes, along the way, there would be several casualties. There would be several, errors made. But that's the story of innovation, right? You cannot, build right kind of contextual relevant solution without making few mistakes, right? As long as those mistakes don't kill you, that's fine, right? So, so in India, fintech story, I think it's still, might sound cliche, but still day zero, still, getting started. More innovation in next 10 years, right, than has happened in past 10 years. That's my summary of, your relevance around the India story.
Sure. Just a small add-on question to this. Like you touched upon that the boundaries between banks and fintechs are going to be blurred. And like in the second point, you mentioned that the scale is not as much as we want to see, right? We want to like see 10x more fintechs. So is there still a role for the traditional players to play in this story? Like, and if yes, like what is the framework for fintechs?
Absolutely, right. Let's look at Indian banking system, right? And since most of your audiences are from India, so I'll keep my answer very specific to India. I used to, give a lecture some time ago, right before the COVID, around the Indian banking story through the eyes of Bollywood, right? So, 1940s and 1950s, Naya Daur, if most of you are familiar with movie, it has Nargis and Sunil Dutt, right? Independent India around that time. 1960s, Mera Gaon, Mera Desh, right? Started happening. 1970s was Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, which is farmer first construct started happening. 1980s was Angry Young Man, Diwar, Amitabh Bachchan started happening, right? 1990s, Dil Chahta Hai. From 2010 onwards is Zindagi Na Mile Dobara, right? These kind of constructs are happening. But going back to your point, Indian banking industry is, from a size and scale standpoint, is still small when you compare it to the size and scale of balance sheets which are there in China and United States, right? And in spite of all the success story, large part of Indian banking is still lopsided in terms of public sector construct and market share, right? 66% of market share, whether on the deposit side or on the CASA side, liability side, the balance sheet is still with public sector banks which are government owned. Remaining is divided up between bank, non-bank, and private and foreign sector rights. Amongst the private sector banks, and this is a personal favorite of mine, we have a big, success story, which is a $100 billion plus outcome called HDFC, right? Super successful company. Past 20, 25 years, tremendous amount of shareholder wealth getting created. So HDFC is a $100 billion plus outcome, one of the mega success stories. And would you like to take a guess in terms of what the market share of HDFC is in this entire pie? of Indian banking ecosystem.
Less than 10%.
Correct. So what is going to happen is two things. Number one, there is a reshuffle in terms of how this pie is allocated across the new age players and the incumbents. Second, the pie will expand. Indian economy has to grow if we have to have this 1.4 billion people doing something, right? So trillions of dollars worth will be get added to the GDP. That means trillions of dollars worth of new credit has to be created. That means multiple trillion dollars worth of money transactions have to be settled.
Yeah.
Right? That means billions of people have to be provided wealth, protection, and other kind of services, contextual. So what will happen over a period of time is new set of companies, some of them are just getting started, and some of them are already big from a size and scale standpoint, will start solving for it. At the same time, big banks also will continue to grow, right? And then in all this construct, there would be a construct wherein collaboration would start happening. Stage one of that is neo-banking constructs, wherein India doesn't have a separate category for digital only bank licenses, right? So some experimentation will happening in terms of license share, balance sheet share, all those kind of things. API banking, which is banking existing products being rendered in someone else's digital environment through an API interface. That's a collaboration first construct, which forward thinking banks have already tried to provide their sandbox environment and opened it up. Yes Bank, bad example from a governance standpoint, but great example from having a sandbox approach in terms of saying ready, steady, go, right? DBS in Singapore is solving for it big time. Open banking is still underway, right? Aadhaar account aggregators and Sahamatis of the world in India are wanting to take that in a different direction, wherein the financial data, which is residing within the servers of the bank, now can be opened up, shared with the customer with their permission, and now a new set of solutions, contextual and all, can happen outside of banking space. Right? Neo banking is still very, very early days, right? Which is a virtual only thing. So I see India banking and fintech story evolving in three paradigms. Paradigm number one is multiple large success stories. These are multiple billion-dollar plus outcomes, right? Whether it is in credit, whether it is in neo-banking space, whether it is in payments, whether it is SMBs, right? Because these huge categories. These are new fintech only plays. Then I see existing incumbent forward-thinking banks gaining market share over public sector banks, because the rapid change of innovation is slightly on a faster clipping as compared to the PSU banks, so on and so forth, right? The non-banking sector will also continue to innovate. Bajaj Finance is a big example in that category. Sorry, I'm giving specific to India thing because I thought contextual answers are relevant, right? And then you will see a lot of interesting models wherein collaboration first constructs would evolve between fintechs, non-fintechs, and banking, because end of the day, solving for customer is the need of the hour, right? So that's the part of it. Yeah.
So one last question before we move on to audience questions. So for the rest of you on the room, just type in your questions in the chat. We'll try to pick up the ones which haven't been answered yet. So we'll do that. So one last question before we go there. So what do you, like, from a people perspective, right? Like most of us are like creators here. What do you think is like the difference of a product manager or an engineer in traditional tech product companies versus like fintech companies? Do you need, there's need for a special skill set, or anyone can start fresh?
Okay, good question. So your question is is there any kind of key skill difference between a product manager in a fintech company versus a non-fintech company, right?
Yeah.
I think the smartest of product managers have a very inherent understanding of customers' needs and problems, right? That's a starting point. I call it the spidey sense, right? They understand in terms of what's needed, but at the same time, they have a very solid understanding of the historical category and evolution of that problem space, right? What has been tried before, why did it work, why did it not work, right? So some kind of understanding of the industry is a added advantage. That's one, which is dots backward. Then a superhuman skill of connecting the dots forward, right? So these are relevant skills for product managers. I will not get into what those specific product skills are. Chances are there are so many good product practitioners sitting. Twitter is full of product managers who are giving so much knowledge bombs every day, right? Just go and read Shreyas, Lenny. There's so many product heroes in the India ecosystem. That's there. But if your question is contextual understanding of the space important, my answer is definitely yes, because understanding compliances, regulations, money, and all that stuff is important. Historical trajectory is important, but at the same time, understanding the pain points and where that resides. Because remember, customer also is interacting with several other products. How does your value proposition fits in? And I have a very simple saying here, right? Customer does not care whether you're a fintech or a bank.
Yeah.
They only care about whether you're solving for their problem or not.
Sure.
Right? So we have to kind of like step out of that. Sometimes, the fintech product manager. So we all are guilty of it. Sometimes, we have created these traps for ourselves, right? But from a customer vantage point, it's very simple. Are you solving what I need, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. Yeah. Okay. That's. I think we can conclude the questions. Let's move on to some audience questions. Let me. So there are two questions around like, how do you like follow stats around all these themes? Animesh, do you want to come and ask your question? If you're on the call. It's okay. I'll ask the question on his behalf. Like, so you put a lot of stats, you put a lot of numbers around all the themes that you spoke in the beginning, right? Like, what are your preferred tools or like newsletters? What's like the source of information?
Sure.
Build this.
Sure. So industry specific information, right? Hard facts.
Yes.
Correct? Okay. Very simple. I think Twitter is a great learning tool in terms of understanding this thing. If you follow the right accounts, automatically information starts falling in your Twitter thread. That's one. Second is what has happened over next 10 years is there are a lot of good, interesting reports and research material which gets circulated, right? So one should start subscribing or reading those material. Some of them are annual research reports, some of them are quarterly, some of them are monthly. Some of the great reports are circulated by a lot of good, venture capital, folks as well. CB Insights, which is a great research, company out of New York, circulates a lot of good, interesting stuff. You should read a lot, because there's no shortcut to it. And then just process this data and connect the dots. Sometimes I go through the boring, RBI notifications and RBI annual and quarterly research reports to understand, what kind of credit origination happened in the country. I go through similar central banks reports circulated in various parts of the world, right? But after some point in time, I think you start picking up the threads and connecting the dots. So that's the thing. Like there are a lot of interesting accounts, on Twitter that one should follow. Follow this gentleman called, if I want to be specific, you should follow CB Insights. You should follow Abhishek Murarka, who does an exceptional job of outlining, good fintech related stuff. There are a lot of other fintech, names which still, I think, maybe I'm getting old, so skipping my memory. But yeah.
Sure. Okay. Shruti, if you're on the call, do you want to go with your question? Yeah, I think she's dropped off. But our question was like, let's say in the case of e-commerce, it was slightly unregulated, and there was a free way like for the e-commerce companies to grow in all directions, right? So how much regulatory leeway is needed for a similar growth story for fintechs?
Right. It's a very good question, right? There's no perfect answer to this. Okay. I'll give you two examples. And this is very contextual and contemporary and relevant in terms of what's panning out. And I'm sure you all must be hearing, how central bank is in China is clamping down on some of the large fintechs and other stuff, right? The China story is very simple. The story is innovation now, regulate later, right? So that's one line. Europe story was regulate now, don't allow innovation. Very simple. Whether this, and this includes all the internet stories as well, right? That's the reason, big internet stories never happened out of Europe. And then the United States story was innovate now and don't allow regulation, right? It's very simple. Now, keeping this in mind, central bank in India plays a very important role, right? Especially given the historical, context of how some of the experiments have panned out. So central bank does not have the responsibility for innovation. Please understand that. They have the responsibility for something called regulation and providing the support ecosystem for a benign experimentation industry growth to keep happening. Right. That's as simple as that. So that there are no institutional risks built into the country, and everything is clean. From a fintech standpoint, I think there is a very clear, trajectory and regulations, right? So-called. I will not call them regulations instead of, guidelines, I'll call them, right? Which are available, which provides very clear direction in terms of how this is panning out, right? So whether this is NPCI, payments, UPI, and all that stuff, one has to be smart enough in terms of, figuring out where the value gets created from a shareholder and a career trajectory and sizable plays are concerned, right? Where a new category of company can get created. That's a summary. But at the same time, I think, and this was one of the points which I talked about in the earlier part, what will happen over the next 10 years, right? Forward-thinking central bankers, as we speak, are already keeping themselves updated in terms of how the big shifts are happening. Mm-hmm. So they are readjusting their regulatory apparatus, whether it is around discussion of having neobanks, the ecosystem, which is digital first construct, whether it is around how the data and local privacy, things will pan out, whether it is around having cross-border remittances, outflow or inflow, right? The amount of leverage, the cost of borrowings, all these things. So these are guarding rails, right? Sure. CBDC is a very interesting thread on that direction, right? Yeah. How do we solve for a crypto first paradigm? I know that my answer is not perfect here, right? Because what is happening is this is evolving. I'm not regulator. I'm an operator, right? Trying to solve for the same question that has been asked, right? There are certain visibility that we have, basis which we are building out some things, right? And so there's a certainty paradigm around which we are solving for. But it's slightly, from my experience so far in India ecosystem and all, India regulator is smart enough to figure out, what is good for ecosystem over a longer period of time or not, right? So they have been encouraging. At the end of the day, everyone wants, the country as a whole to prosper and march forward, right? So yeah, CBDC, if you think of it, and I digress, if you just kind of like peel the onion, CBDC renders retail banks, consumer banks redundant, right? Completely. The money multiplier thing, nonsense, goes away, right? So one has to look at how this thing will pan out. I think regulators will have to be fast, more agile and nimble over a period of time. You will see a lot of industry and regulatory collaboration to ensure that the ecosystem marches forward. That's the way I'm seeing this. We can of course get into the specifics around how the innovation curve, how the regulation curve is aligned.
Sure.
Sorry, maybe that was not the perfect answer, but that's the best I could come up with.
No, but I think you summarized it really well when you spoke about how regulation works in different countries. That's good. We have time for 2 more questions. Kush, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hearing you. I want to understand essentially, when we are talking about, AI coming into the picture, or more predictability is in place alongside more personalized advisory or insights. What do you think about it? And how do you see this landscape going forward?
Kush, I missed this question of yours. Can you please repeat it? Your voice had slightly static in it, please. Could you please repeat the question?
Sure. Am I audible?
Yes, this is slightly better. I'm missing
around the wealth.
Kaushik, if you could just repeat the question for me.
Yeah, sorry, Kush, I will repeat. So basically, you're saying that with AI and more predictability coming into the picture, how do you think personalized wealth tech landscape to grow in India? Around what do you think? How much time will it take to mature?
So maturity part I can't answer, but what will happen is there are 2 things that we need to solve for, first of all, right? Number 1 is called the data part of it, because that's the building block, foundational building block in terms of having a predictive AI, which is contextual and relevant work for us, right? Second, what is happening is the AI is moving in the commodity layer, right? Wherein, whether it is edge case computing, whether it is AI which is coming into your AWS stack or other cloud stack, right? And this is where I alluded briefly to the infrastructure as a service, or BaaS as a service, which essentially has algorithms, which is intelligence, which has rule engines built in, right? I think that's something which is a medium to long-term play, because this will require tremendous amount of investments on infrastructure, time, data, so on and so forth, right? So yeah, I think next 3 or 4 years is when I see this panning out. In some form and fashion, it already exists, right? And this is a very raw form of AI, if I would say, right? It's narrow intelligence still, which essentially means, your investment app or your platform, if it has a little bit of contextual data on you, can quickly categorize your risk, profiling, right, and thereby recommend, the investment spaces where you fall on this entire risk spectrum, right? That's already happening. I think InWealth is already doing that. We are also co-creating a company in the wealth tech space in India, right, where some of the AI first construct we're going to, pan out, right? But still early days. The big thing that we need to solve for is contextual, well-labeled, structured, trained data, right? And then the interoperability, which is very, very critical, right? How the API paradigm pans out, because data feeds in terms of market fluctuations and all have to be real time. Someone else, end of the day, it's money, right? You don't want to be losing money on behalf of someone, right? Making money is good, but losing money for someone is a cardinal sin.
Yeah, we have a responsibility also to.
Yeah, it's building a fintech is a fiduciary responsibility, right?
Yeah.
It's solving for trust. Trust is the important part of it.
Yeah. Sure. We'll go for like one last question. Pratik, if you're on the call.
Hey, hi. I hope I'm audible. Can you guys hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
Pratik.
Hey, hi. Thanks, Gaurav. This was an amazing session. Actually, I'm new to this, so it was really quite insightful for me. I just had one question actually around. So, what do you think experienced finance professionals, right, who have more of accounting and finance background, mostly on the IB side, right, with like the back end finance, should focus on to be more relevant in the industry, right? Because this is, as you mentioned, right, this would be it might not replace completely your traditional banking, but this will have a major impact in the coming years. And obviously, as professionals, we should adapt ourselves proactively as much as we can with the changing needs of the industry and the consumers. So yeah, I hope I explained my question.
Sorry, I missed one part of it, which you said from an IB, from an investment banking.
So basically more from a back-end perspective. So someone who comes from a core accounting and finance background, what should they focus on? Because fintech, obviously, from a predetermined mindset in India comes like, okay, there's a tech-heavy background at the end of the day. And that's what we see in most of the startups coming in. It's mostly the tech guys with some finance background or like mostly engineering, MBA people who start that.
I slightly disagree on the last part of it. So two bits, right? It's a good question, Pratik, right? A lot of folks, a lot of friends who are, slightly senior professionals in the banking construct generally ask me this question, right? It's very, very simple. From a customer standpoint, the demarcation doesn't exist. That's number one. Number two is if you are really inclined in terms of making the shift, right? Because that's where the future is going, right? Just go and join a fintech company. The skills are transferable, right? If you look at any fintech company, there are broadly 5-7 core functional areas, right? And of course, you can narrow down on the industry segment. I outlined some 6 segments, right? From wealth tech to insurance to lending to crypto, DeFi, and all that stuff, right? Just identify a fintech parallel which is operating in the space which excites you, and you have some kind of foundational understanding and knowledge, right? People who work in banks are extremely knowledgeable, right? So I don't buy that logic that they are not relevant. What is needed is a combination of young talent, which is tech heavy, combined with solid product insights and industry understanding. Right? So yeah, the best way to transition out is just go and join a fintech of your choice, partner with a founder, join a core team where you clearly set the expectations, right? That, hey, these are the gaps in your skill, which we are wanting to build on. This is what you already understand about the space, right? So automatically what happens is within, 12, 24 odd months, chances are you would have contributed more and learned more in the process, right? That's how you transition out. That's how I transitioned out, from 2008 onwards. I realized, okay, technology is the shift. So I started, getting involved in a lot of startup work, a lot of other work, right? I have an 18-year-old in my team. Maybe he's listening into this call, right? One of the smartest product guys, right? Didn't even finish his college, zero understanding of fintech. But now today, if you put him in the room, he's been with us for about 12 months. You put him in the room, chances are he will, have as much knowledge and insight as someone who has spent like 15, 20 years in banking industry, right? It's a steep learning curve, which happens automatically, right? And as long as you have a learning mindset and a growth mindset, Pratik, I don't see a problem at all, right? People who have industry specific knowledge are huge assets for fintech world, because they help avoid type A and type B kind of errors, which again can be existential crisis for a lot of companies.
That's really helpful. Well, probably just one follow-up question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Because obviously, when I mentioned the background, right, it's really difficult for us to connect with those people because we don't have them in our network in most cases. So how do you try and connect and at least get that opportunity to begin with?
Very simple. Very simple. Number one, show up on Twitter every day. That's number one. Number two, follow the accounts and the companies that you want to go and work with. Number three, drop a note to the CEO and founder of that company with what you want to do and what you can contribute. Set up a meeting. People are more accessible than you think.
That's helpful, yeah.
That's very simple. This ain't going to happen on LinkedIn. Let me caution you.
I think we are more accustomed to LinkedIn, so yeah. Twitter is something, personally, I've never used much.
No,
so,
there's a joke in the Twitter world, right? LinkedIn is the classmates you had, right? Twitter is the classmates you wanted. Is that correct? Did I paraphrase it correct, Kaushik?
Yeah. I like all these quotes that you're bringing up. It's really good. Yeah, that's very relevant. Yeah, so just like finishing off like with one question that came from YouTube. So if someone is still in college and if they want to get into the fintech world, I know you covered all these in the previous questions, but anything that they can do to get a head start?
Sure. Read as much as they can about, I cannot repeat it again. Read as much as you can about the fintech industry. It opens up certain part of the brain, right? So that your contextual understanding goes up. Then go start working either as an intern or as a first job, or pick up certain micro skills which are relevant, right? Which doesn't require tech expertise. If you have a tech background, wonderful. Chances are, it's a lot more easier. If you don't have tech backgrounds, then you start developing your product skills, your design skills, operational skills, so on and so forth, depending on what your area of interest is, right? Go set up that meeting. Set up that half-an-hour meeting with someone who's already working in the fintech field. Have a list of high-quality questions, right? Ask them, can you go and work with them for a couple of weeks, couple of months? That's the way, right? That's how you start, right? Opportunities don't come, opportunities are created, right?
Cool. Yeah, that's all for today. I think it's a wrap. Thank you once again, Gaurav. Thanks a lot for taking the time. I am personally like more excited about being in the fintech industry and continuing about the next 10 years that you have projected. I think this has been an amazing session, and we have all had a lot to learn from you. Thank you once again, Gaurav.
No, thank you. Pleasure is all mine. I hope this was useful on a Saturday evening for your audience. As things would have it, purely coincidence, I started my career as first job on 17th of July in the year 2000, right? Don't worry, I'm not that old. But I'm as excited I was on that day one of my first job, right? As I am today, and more excited, right? The next 10, 20, 30 years are like super exciting in terms of anyone who is in the fintech space or has ambitions to be in the fintech space, right? So yeah, so thanks again. I really had a good time, on this session, right? Hopefully this was useful for most of you, right? I'm on Twitter. Feel free to DM me, right? If there is any specific questions that you might have, right? Yeah. Thanks again, Chandranuj and Kaushik and creators of product. You guys are doing an amazing job in terms of propagating, product first construct. Okay, I'm going to do a plugin here. We are hiring across roles, right? I'm shamelessly doing this, right? So you'll see a bunch of tweets from our side in terms of various roles, various products and all that we are working on. We are looking at core team members, founding team members to be a part of various things that we are building. So yeah, if you have certain inclination, interest, send me a DM. Send us an email.
Sure, sure. Yeah, we'll definitely publish this in the Slack community as well. Sure. Thank you everyone for joining in today. It was a great session.
Awesome. Take care. Bye-bye. God bless you.
Bye.
Thank you, Gaurav. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you so much.